What's up, everybody? I'm Jason. Welcome back to A Point in Focus, the official podcast for the Points in Focus YouTube channel. And today I am kind of doing another opinion piece today. I actually have been thinking about this for a while, and having played now with my R5 Mark II for a bit over a month, or a couple months now actually, and obviously I have a ton of experience with Canon's R5 and the R5C and variety of older Canon DSLRs and so forth. I started thinking about how Canon implements things, and not necessarily how they maybe how they should implement things, or what they should implement. And I mean, this is certainly one of those places where I'm very interested to see how my ideas shake out compared to what I think or what other people think. So this one is a real comment opener, if you will. I'd love to hear your feedback on how things should, on what I'm saying, basically, what Canon should do to improve the implementation of stuff on their camera. Now, I have not put these in any particular order, and as you probably saw from the title, these are 8 things that I think are 8 features, functions, implementation details, etc., that I think Canon's competitors have implemented better than Canon. Unfortunately, I don't have an instance in hand of every one of their competitors' cameras, or really any of their competitors' cameras, a lot of this is going off of the research that I've done in looking at their manuals and talking to people who use them and so on and so forth. But in no particular order, let's just talk about some things I think Canon could do better and that their competition does better in that respect. So starting off, I want to talk about focus bracketing. Focus bracketing is the automation that you use to do depth of field stacking or focus stacking to get large depth of field images while still shooting at potentially relatively narrow apertures. As cameras are increasingly becoming diffraction limited at higher and higher apertures, this, I think, is a technique that makes more and more sense, because you can continue to shoot at an optimal aperture like, say, f5.6 or f6.3 or 7.1. That being 7.1 being the diffraction limited aperture for a 45 megapixel camera, and not having to shoot at f16 or f22. Of course, if you do macro work for, like watches or things like that, then that is also a place where, depth of field stacking is a big aspect of what's going on. So, in looking around, Canon's not the only company that implements depth of field stacking or bracketing. I think Fuji does it better. I think there's some nits that I have with the way Fuji implements things, but Canon's process is you focus at the closest focusing distance you want, you tell the camera how many pictures you want it to take and how much of a step you want between the pictures, and then it focuses from wherever you focused at close focus out to infinity. And if you happen to be focused at infinity, you don't get anything, because it doesn't do from infinity to close focus when it realizes that maybe you're on the wrong end of things. Now, Fujifilm, on the other hand, lets you set your thresholds, and it does this the really intelligent way, which is by using the focus system on the camera. So you focus where you want your near threshold to be, you focus where you want your far threshold to be, and then the camera will do what it needs to do to focus through that. What's actually kind of amusing about this in some respects to me is way back when I don't remember if it was a feature on the 1D Mark III, but it certainly was a feature on the 1D Mark II that came before it. Canon had a depth of field priority mode where you would focus on your close limit, you would focus on your far limit, and then the camera would figure out what aperture it needed to set and where it needed to focus in that range to get everything as in focus as it could. And they got rid of this years and years and years ago, and so the idea of implementing a focus bracket as a focus on a near place, tell the camera this is where I want, focus on a far place, tell the camera this is where I want, really is not a new thing for Canon. It's just a thing that they've kind of forgotten about, and it's a thing that, like I said, I think Fuji does better in their focus bracketing user interface. Now, the one thing I don't particularly care for about Fuji's focus bracket interface and the way they do this is they use different buttons to set the near and far limit. So you focus in one place, you push one button on the camera, you focus in the far place, you push another button. That's fine. I mean, I'm not going to say that that's a wrong way or bad way to do it. I think it could be done more elegantly, you know, without having to use different buttons to do different things. But that is kind of an implementation detail that's not even, at this stage, not even worth worrying about, because like I said, Canon doesn't even have the useful part where you can focus near, focus far, and have the camera do all the stacking for you. So that was one. Number two, pixel shift multi-shot. If you're not aware, if you haven't gotten an R5 Mark II yet, or you aren't paying too much attention, pixel shift multi-shot is now gone in the R5 Mark II. Canon's implementation in the R5 was garbage. It was hot garbage. There's no two ways to talk about it. If there was any movement in the scene that you were shooting, the camera's in-camera stacking and compositing function would end up drawing black lines like every other pixel where that motion was happening. It couldn't deal with it for one reason or another, and I have no idea why. Clearly, the camera could move the sensor around as it required, but this is ultimately where Canon's screw up was, and why Fuji and Sony, and in the past, I think Hasselblad, have done this better. Both Fuji and Sony, as far as I know or remember, both allow you to just shoot your pixel shift images for compositing later. They don't try to do it, or they don't force you to do it in camera. I'm okay potentially with the in-camera compositing, kind of, but this is one of those places where I feel like you can't force it in camera. I talked about this when I've complained about this functionality in the past. By forcing it to be in camera, Canon made it so that you really couldn't use it unless you were absolutely 100% certain that your nothing would move in the scene. If anything moved or could move, then you could not use the functionality. You had to shoot it, or you could, but you at a minimum had to shoot a safety image in the regular 45 megapixel mode. By just using the camera to do the pixel shift, moving the sensor around, you don't have that problem. You can go back and composite it in Photoshop or any other software that'll do the pixel shift multi-shot compositing. And if it turns out that that isn't right, or there's a problem or an artifact, well, you still have 4 or 9 single shifted pixel images that you can just take one of those and use that as your image. Now, I think Canon should should bring this back. Well, there's an argument to that, but and support, first of all, the Sony and Fuji position of, we're going to just shoot the images in the camera, we're not going to try and combine them. It's possible maybe that Canon, with the AI accelerator and the R5 Mark II and whatnot, could do a better job of combining the images, although there's no AI involved in this. It's just upscale overlay and then blend, but get rid of the forced part in the camera. So as a part of that, I think this should be available for both RAW and JPEG, because if you're just capturing images, it doesn't matter which format you use, because you're just capturing images, moving the sensor around a little bit. Sony's implementation allows you to choose between 3 and 9 images for your pixel shift set. Which may be similar to what Fuji offers, because Fuji offers a optimize for color or resolution. And my assumption is optimizing capture for color versus resolution is either going to change the number of pictures, so like 4 versus 9, and or the amount of shift. So in color, you would potentially want to shift 1 pixel, so you're taking essentially red, green, and blue at each pixel location. For resolution, you're going to want to shift potential. I think it's going to be a bit more than a pixel. It's going to be fractional pixels, because that's how you're going to get the ability to upscale and then average together to get a higher resolution image. Essentially, you're imaging like overlapping, but not full pixel shifted overlapping, because if you did that, you would just have the same resolution just shifted. So you're partially overlapping frames that when you double them in resolution and then overlay them and average them, the little bits of offset actually increase the resolution or allow you to increase the resolution. But I guess the biggest discussion on the whole pixel shift multi-shot point, and I actually didn't think about this until I started doing this presentation. I wasn't even thinking about this when I was putting the keynote together to just get my points out, is this even relevant anymore? With AI upscaling and Photoshop and Lightroom and from Topaz Labs and Gigapixel and Photo AI, and the potential for that to basically give us the same roughly 2x or 3x upscaling with about the same image quality, does it even matter that much? So on the R5 Mark II, and this applies to the R1 as well, of course, Canon got rid of the pixel shift multi-shot hyper-resolution thing, which of course made a 240 megapixel JPEG or something ridiculous like that, and replaced it in the camera with a in-camera 96 megapixel AI upscale. So it'll basically double your resolution up to 96 megapixels. Once we get past, I mean, I've talked about this with sensor resolutions. You know, once you get past a threshold, and I really think it's about 30, 36 megapixels, you start really running into diminishing returns. Going from 30 to 45 megapixels did not make my pictures 50% better. Going from 45 to, say, 60 megapixels is not going to make my pictures 33% better. You know, going from 45 to 96 or 45 to 120 or 240 or whatever the AI upscaling super resolution isn't going to make my pictures 2 or 3 times better. It's just going to be a fractional percentage better. The diminishing returns really kill that. And when I guess one of the things that I ran into that really frustrated me with the old pixel shift multi-shot implementation is because of the way it worked and the fact that you could get the artifacts, you couldn't even just say, well, you know what, I really didn't need any more than 45 megapixels for this anyway. I just kind of was hoping I would. Or I will upscale it in post in an AI upscaler to, say, 96 or whatever, or 100 megapixels, and, just move on with that. So I'm not even sure, to be honest, that pixel shift multi-shot is, for super resolution and color improvements, is really all that relevant for the general use case. For certain specific cases, and this really applies to depth of field stacking too, or focus bracketing, it's certainly useful, but for, like, in general, I think this may be a technology that's kind of been supplanted with the whole artificial intelligence thing. Frame averaging, number 3 on my list. It really should be number 1 on my list. This is something that Phase 1 has implemented in their medium format backs, and it has been something that I have been banging on about and using for more than 10 years now. Frame averaging, if you've never heard it, is the synthetic process, or what I always used to call digital synthesis of neutral density. Instead of putting a neutral density filter in front of your camera to get a really long exposure, you take a lot of short exposures and average them together. And the truth, the dirty truth of this is, bar some specific details in certain cases that can be problematic, especially if the camera isn't designed to do frame averaging or to support frame averaging properly. You can run into a few issues if you're trying to shoot at very high or very fast shutter speeds. for your exposures, but the short of it is that this produces images with higher dynamic range and lower noise because you're averaging. And anytime you average multiple images, noise is random, and averaging randomness will cause it to average towards what that value actually should be, as opposed to off in random directions. And so this is a wonderful technique, especially if you're a landscape photographer. I have a video in the pipeline to talk about how to do this better or in more detail, but especially if you're a landscape photographer, because this is something that, first of all, you don't have to carry neutral density filters, or at least a lot of neutral density filters. You might have to carry one low, like a 2-stop or a 3-stop or something like that. You get better quality images out of the result out of this than using neutral density. So you're not, it's not even a matter of just like, oh, I don't have to carry less. I'm actually going to get a better product out of the end. Now, Canon used to be able to kind of, well, you used to be able to do this on the R5 in camera to a certain extent. Multiple exposure mode on the camera did support a RAW, or did support an averaging mode, and on the R5 could be done in RAW. Now, this ran into problems, and this is a big part of why I've talked, why I'm so frustrated with Canon's distortion with L lenses and lenses in general, the extreme distortion and wide angle focal lengths. On the R5, because frame averaging was done in RAW and distortion couldn't be corrected out because that's not really RAW anymore, certain lenses you couldn't use with frame averaging on the camera. Multiple exposure, didn't matter whether you were averaging or not, but certain lenses you just couldn't use with it. So you'd put a lens on your camera and go to do this, to shoot a landscape, and it would say, sorry, can't use that lens. To get around that, on the subsequent cameras that Canon released, starting with the R3, all of the multi-exposure stuff is done in JPEG, because they can do the corrections before they do the JPEG conversion, and then you have a JPEG, and then you get a JPEG. So now the multi-exposure stuff on, for example, the R5 Mark II or the R1 or the R3 or almost all of the lower, like R10, R7, whatever, all of those, you can still do up to 3 1/3 stops or just over 3 stops of frame averaging using the multi-exposure system on those cameras, but you end up with a JPEG. Now, of course, compared to a 14-bit RAW file, an 8-bit JPEG has far greater steps between tonal gradations throughout the image, and you're taking a pretty serious hit in image quality. Now, as I said, Phase 1 has added this to their medium format cameras, frame averaging. You can set the camera up, dial in your exposure, and then tell the camera you want to do frame averaging. And from what I can tell, they basically do it the right way. Because there's 2 ways you can go about doing this. You can either do the neutral density equivalency, which is basically like I tell the camera I want 5 stops of neutral density, and it does basically the simple math of 2 to the 5th and says, okay, that's so many images that I'm going to shoot and average together, and then it shoots those images, averages them together, and gives you your result. Or you can do the other reason why this is better than neutral density, which is the time mode. You can say, I want a 5-minute exposure. Averaged. The averaged exposure is 5 minutes. So your individual exposures are going to be shorter than that, whatever they end up having to be, and then the camera is just going to shoot and shoot and shoot and average and shoot and average and shoot and average and shoot and average for that 5 minutes. And this works around kind of the big problem with traditional neutral density, which is the math and the complexity of you go out to shoot a sunset or something like that, and you have to meter, and then you figure out what your exposure is, and then you go through your bag of neutral density or variable neutral density or whatever, and you go, okay, I've got 10 stops, and that means that my neck, I have to figure out how a I don't know, a 20th of a second or whatever, what that ends up being 10 stops down, down the road. So you pull out your phone and your exposure calculator and you go, oh, that's only going to be a minute. I want 3 minutes for this shot. What do I do now? How do I adjust for that? With frame averaging on the time side of things, you just say, I want 3 minutes. That's it. And hit start or hit the shutter release, and the camera does it, and you get an image at the end that is a frame average 3 minute long exposure made up of averaged together from a ton of shorter exposures. Additionally, the other thing I didn't even mention because I totally slipped my mind, high powered neutral densities, when you start to get to 7, 8, 9, 10 stops, start to have issues. No neutral density filter has a perfectly flat spectral response. They tend to let a little bit more this or a little bit more that through, and this is even exacerbated, of course, with the good ones. For example, those by Breakthrough Photography, and I think Tiffin has a series that falls in this range, try to be as spectrally flat as they can be. Tiffin even goes so far as to put an infrared hot mirror reflective or an infrared reflective coating on it, because most of the time at the infrared end, the red attenuates, but the infrared doesn't. The camera can still capture that, and that will color shift your image. A lot of the other neutral density filters are not quite so neutral. I had a Format high-tech 10-stop neutral density filter that put such a strong, I want to say green, color cast on the images, although it might have been magenta. One of the two, color casts on the image that it was completely uncorrectable. The only thing you could do with the pictures is convert them to black and white. I have a Lee Big Stopper, which is their 10-stop filter, and that worked a lot better, but it still requires correction because of the fact that it is not perfectly linear, or the spectral response or the attenuation is not perfectly linear across all colors. That's not a problem with frame averaging. Frame averaging averages what a normal image is, and so you don't end up in a situation where you're applying 10 or 20 stops equivalents of frame averaging, and you're going to get a color shift because the infrared is affecting the image at that long of an exposure. So this is something I've been sort of harping or banging the drum on, because I think it's a really useful tool for especially landscape photographers. I'm super awesome to see that Phase 1 implemented this, but this is something that now that Canon has destroyed the ability to do this in camera with the multiple exposure mode, now that it's all JPEGs, it would be nice to have an actual proper dedicated frame averaging mode that does this properly and correctly. So moving on from frame averaging, this one is actually, there's a couple of Nikon things here in this video. So I've hit Fuji twice, Sony once, Phase 1 once. We're gonna hit Nikon a couple times. Nikon has extended slow shutter ranges on their Z system cameras. So on most of our cameras, like if you're a Canon guy, you say your R5, your R5 Mark II, the slowest shutter speed that you can dial in manual mode is 30 seconds. It's actually 32 seconds, but we'll just call it 30 seconds because that's what the cameras all call it. Nikon has the option to allow you to dial in from up to 900 seconds. Now, of course, you can obviously put your camera in bulb and use a remote external control or remote release, or you can use the internal timer system to do something with really long exposures. But 900 seconds is 15 minutes, and the Cameras are capable of doing it because, again, you can put the camera in bulb and keep the shutter open for hours. The math is not a problem or shouldn't be a problem for the camera to do. And for people shooting landscapes or star trails or whatever, we start getting into a range where this kind of extended thing is actually going to be useful or could be useful. And like I said, this shouldn't be a very difficult thing to implement. It's just a thing that needs to be implemented, and potentially, if you do it the way Nikon does it, which I sort of agree with, or I do agree with, an option to turn it on or off, because not everybody's going to want to have the extra, settings for out to 900 seconds or whatever. But I think this is a really it's a small thing, but I think it can be a really useful thing, and I think it's a valuable thing to have in the camera. This is also a Nikonism. With the R5 Mark II, Canon has, or this is also a borrow from Nikonism. With the R5 Mark II, Canon has released 3 battery grips for it. 2 battery grips and a cooling fan base, which doesn't have vertical shooting controls, so it's not really a battery grip, but it is a battery grip if you get what I'm saying. So that's already 3 different SKUs for power on the camera. And of course, we all know that the R5 Mark II is a power-hungry beast. You pretty much have to use it with the new LPE6P batteries to get full functionality out of the camera. Even the LPE6NHs severely curtail what the camera can do. If you're plugging it into USB power delivery, we're now using the 15-volt power profile instead of the 12-volt profiles. So there's just more going on. Now, what am I suggesting borrowing from Nikon or stealing from them, thought-wise? Well, if you were around in photography back in the late 2000s and late 2000s all the way to sort of the mirrorless revolution, talking about cameras like the Nikon D700, D800, and D810, their battery grips could use either the little batteries that those cameras used, which was 2 different batteries ultimately, or they could use the batteries that the D3, in the case of the D700, or D4, 5, and 6, in the case of the D800 and D810, if I'm remembering things correctly, could use. Now, Nikon's battery grip implementation at the time was a bit different from Canon's. Nikon, you put a battery in the hand grip of the camera, so you didn't take the hand grip cover off and everything. And then you put another battery in the grip. So you still had 2 batteries, but you didn't have 2 batteries that were super accessible the way Canon does their battery grips, which is you put 2 batteries in the grip and you replace the battery in the camera with the stalk from the grip. This meant that Nikon shooters in that time period could have a professional body in, say, a D4, D5, and could have a high-resolution body in, say, a D810, and when they went out in the field, they could use 1 battery packet platform and 1 charger platform, which I've done this. So years ago, almost 10 years ago now, when I first started traveling and doing photography, I had a 1D Mark III, which used Canon's big professional series camera batteries, and a 5D Mark III, which used the LPE6 series batteries that we know and use today. And that was an incredibly frustrating experience for me because I had to take 2 chargers. A great big one that really could have been the only charger I needed, but Canon didn't think that way. So I had 1 great big charger that did the LP, or the professional batteries, the ones for I think it was the LPE4 at the time, for the 1D, and it could do 2 batteries at the same time, and it was great, and blah, blah, blah. And then I had to carry another charger or 2, the LPE6 series chargers for the 5D. Now, I've solved my problem in that respect now, in that everything I shoot with uses LPE6s. My 5Ds use my 5D Mark IVs use LPE6s. My R5s, R5Cs, R5 Mark II, all of that use LPE6s. But I'm also not shooting with that professional level camera that is a lot more relevant if I was doing sports or a lot more high action or action in wildlife, where I might want the frame rate, etc., to where I would be carrying the two things. I don't personally think it's entirely unreasonable to suggest that there are photographers out there, especially now that the EOS R5 is the Canon high-res camera, that have an R1 or an R3 and an R5 or an R5C or an R5 Mark II, and therefore are carrying now two kinds of batteries and two kinds of chargers. And in the case of the R5 Mark II, well, the camera should already be perfectly capable of using the battery. It's a 15-volt camera now, and it will run off of the 7.4 volt or 7.2 volt LPE6s. So the LPE19s are 10.8 volts, which is like perfectly fine in the middle of that range. There should be no reason that that is a problem. And while I'm maybe not suggesting following Nikon's path of keep a battery in the camera and only have one battery in the grip, I like the accessibility of multiple batteries in the grip and not having to take the grip off of the camera to change a battery. We've already got, like I said, and I started this, we already have 3 battery grips for the R5 Mark II. I don't see why a 4th would be a problem. Or alternatively, design the grips so that you could plug an LPE19 into it, and then the carrier would get around that for the LPE6s or whatever. But a 4th battery grip, you know, 'cause you already got to make a choice. You can either do the battery grip that just has the shooting controls and takes 2 batteries, which is what I have on my camera 90% of the time. You can do the battery grip with the 2.5 gig Ethernet port, which has all the same controls and functionality as the regular battery grip, but adds a 2.5 gig Ethernet port, which almost to me, that's like you could have also just put the Pro battery in that and made that the Pro battery grip with the 2.5 gig Ethernet port. Or you've got the cooling fan base with a 2.5 gig Ethernet port, and, you know, like, there, you got to make a decision somewhere what you're doing. You know, are you worried about overheating when shooting video? Then you probably want to have the cooling fan base on. You know, are you going to be tethered? Then you probably might want the 2.5 gig Ethernet version instead of using Wi-Fi, etc. But it seems like Canon's fine making 3 different battery grips for the camera that are marginally different from each other. Why not have a 4th that makes it the R5 series completely, you know, mesh with the R1 and R3? Okay, moving on. Remote control from an attached display. And I am borrowing this idea from Red and Blackmagic Design, both of whom have cinema cameras. You can buy certified displays for them, and when you plug the display in, they can control the camera. Granted, we can, and in case of at least Blackmagic Design, if not Red, I think it's both though. When I say control the camera, I don't just mean start and stop recording. I mean, you can go through any of the menus, access any of the camera functions, make changes, etc. to anything that the camera is doing. Yes, those are cinema cameras, but the reality is I have run into more than enough situations where being able to use a large touchscreen monitor at an awkward angle, or because the camera is like overhead or something and I have a monitor on my desk, it would be really nice for me to just be able to use the touchscreen on the monitor to make an adjustment to the camera, and Canon doesn't support that, and I think that would be really useful. So that's not a big one. Here's an actual, this one I thought was amusing in thinking about it, but steal this from Canon. Hey, Canon, you should steal this from yourself. Slow and fast motion. So if you go into any of the cinema cameras like the EOS R5C, they have a slow and fast motion mode. And in slow and fast motion mode, basically what you're doing is recording at a frame rate with the metadata for the file set to a different frame rate. And the way they do this is you specify a slow and fast motion frame rate, which could be from 1 frame per second to 120 frames per second, at least on the R5C. And you specify your normal playback or recording frame rate. So, 24, 25, 30, 50, 60 frames per second. And the camera will automatically mark that file as being, say, a 24 frame per second file, but it's shooting it at 120 frames per second. So you get a 5x slowdown, or I think that's right, 5x slowdown to your normal playback speed. On the R5 Mark II and Canon's other consumer cameras, there is a slow motion mode where it kind of does this. On the R5 Mark II specifically, you can shoot in either 120 or 240 frames per second, or 100 or 200 frames per second if you're a PAL shooter. And it will mark up the file as being shot at a slower frame rate. The slower frame rate is 30 frames per second for NTSC, or 25 frames per second for the PAL modes. You have no choice in the matter. So if you're shooting 24, you still have to go into your post-production software and tell it that it's a 24 frame per second file, not a 30 frame per second file, because the metadata says 30 frames per second. You also don't have very good control over the frame rates. You can go 120, 240, or 100, 200, but you can't, say, shoot at 96 or 3 or 6. Or 22 or 20, which if you want to do undercranking for a fight scene, that's where you want to actually be shooting, is 22 or 20 for 24 frame per second playback. It's far more flexible and useful in the R5C and the other cinema cameras than the slow motion recording is on the R5, just as a whole. Speaking of video things, in-camera ProRes recording. Nikon and Fuji both implement this. I don't particularly care. For my workflow, for what I'm shooting and doing, having ProRes in camera is not really that useful to me. But I also recognize that I am not the normal, or I am not the only workflow that works around, say, an R5 or C or an R5 or any of these cameras. There are going to be people that are going to be using them in a higher production standard thing. And yes, I do have my qualms or questions about just how relevant ProRes is as a format anymore. It's primarily, Apple primarily designed it to allow you to edit 4K on machines that couldn't support 4K in a more compressed format. So ProRes makes a very big trade-off in terms of compression efficiency for processing power. But in this day and age, are all of our GPUs, CPUs in laptops, everything can do accelerated decoding of HEVC, AVC, in modern CPUs, AV1. Really the only qualm on the whole thing is, unless you're shooting with or using Apple or Intel GPUs, you don't have 422 chroma subsampling support for GPU accelerated decoding. NVIDIA, come on, and AMD for that matter, but even an NVIDIA Quadro, a high-end professional level NVIDIA Quadro, still does not support 422 chroma subsampling, which is basically the standard chroma subsampling for higher or mid to middle high-end video production workflows. It's only when you get into like Hollywood and 444 and RAW that you kind of step past that. But for anything that's more in the mid-range, 422 is the chroma subsampling that people are going to be using. So I'm not 100% certain of how relevant ProRes is now as opposed to like where it was 10 or 15 years ago, but I certainly think it's a useful feature to have, and it's something that I would really like to see Canon borrow from Fuji and Nikon and implement in the in hardware in the camera. So with that said, I have been rambling for I don't really know how long. If you have some thoughts on this or things that are implemented in another brand that you use or have used that you would like to see or think Canon would be, would behoove Canon to implement, let me know in the comments. The same thing goes if you have some thoughts on the stuff that I suggested that they implement. I'd like to hear from you. But anyway, let me know what you think. That said, I hope you found this useful or at least interesting. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button. Also, if this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Finally, if you'd like to help and support this channel, you can help us for free by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a comment with your experiences. Likewise, you can support us by hitting that thanks button or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.